Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 272, we catch up with Andrew Grune and Evie O, authors of the new books Day Trip Melbourne and Dog Trip Melbourne. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Previously, we've interviewed authors Andrew Grune and Evie O on their Sydney-based books Day Trip Sydney, 52 Nature Adventures, and Dog Trip Sydney, 52 Dog-Friendly Nature Adventures. These guidebooks provided simple and easy-to-understand guides to their respective walks in the Sydney region, all with some very great imagery. In today's episode, we catch back up with Andrew and Evie to talk about the release of their two new guidebooks, Day Trip Melbourne 52 Nature Adventures and Dog Trip Melbourne 52 Dog-Friendly Nature Adventures that now cater for Victoria's capital city. Evie, Andrew, thank you for taking the time to catch up with Australian Hiker on these two new books.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, now before we talk about your newly released books, give us a bit of a brief introduction to those listeners who may not have caught up with the previous episodes about what you're trying to achieve with your guidebooks.
Well, I guess, I think we are normal people. We are common people. We love and we seek nature because we are a creation of urban environment. We find it really hard to find something that's kind of like easy to do, can be done in a, when you don't have to plan too much and, it's a short walk, 2 hours long with a big reward, natural reward at the end, whether it's a waterfall or a swim. We thought, where are all these places? And it kind of started with us doing Day Trip Sydney 2 years ago during COVID, because obviously we couldn't go anywhere. And we were recently dating there. And we're like, okay, let's go on road trips. And we ended up finding so many precious places surrounding Sydney. And, 2 years later, our curiosity kind of went, where is next? Where are other places in Australia that we can kind of, in a way, explore? And we just decided to kind of let's do Melbourne. I mean, it is also the publishers are thinking sales-wise, that's the second most populated city. And we're like, okay, well, how do we do Melbourne? And we decided, why don't we just spend 3 months exploring, when I said Melbourne, Victoria, but, from Melbourne. And we found so many gems, very, very different to Sydney. And that's kind of how this guidebook started.
Now, tell me, you guys released Day Trip Sydney and Dog Trip Sydney recently, or over the last couple of years. Where's your background? Are you Sydneyites, or have you've moved, or do you know Melbourne well?
I grew up in Sydney. I had been to Melbourne a few times, but I definitely don't think at that time I was qualified to write a guidebook about it.
I grew up in Surabaya, and I have more friends in Melbourne than Andrew, so that's something. No, but I guess writing Sydney for us, even though we've lived, Andrew grew up in Sydney, and I've lived in Sydney for maybe about 15 years then, before writing the guidebooks, we didn't know these places exist. So that, that kind of naivety and not really knowing what's surrounding you and the curiosity that we both have kind of in a way makes us a surprising writers. I'm not going to say, positive words like good or seasoned, but we kind of discovered things that maybe are not that new to other people who are seasoned hikers, but we as kind of like, we like to call ourselves like the beginners. We find them really just fresh and just really unexpected, even though, it's been there all along. So
I think also when you live somewhere, you kind of take it for granted. So before we did Day Trip Sydney, I spent most of my adult life not living in Sydney. I was overseas, and I came back, and we were given this project of Day Trip Sydney, and I lived there for so many years, and we discovered so much cool stuff. And I think often when you travel somewhere, you do find amazing new things that often locals might overlook. I hope that doesn't upset any Melbourners, but we have a fresh eye to look at things.
I think that's the thing. I mean, if whatever town or city you live in, you tend to take it for granted. You just live in it and without thinking too much about it. And I think from your perspective, as you say, even though Evie, you've got friends in Melbourne, you may not know it as well as Sydney. And I think you start looking for things that, as you say, other people may not consider just because it's their normal day to day. So I think you can look at it from a beginner's perspective and think, what is it that I'm looking for, and what is it that other people would want to get out of this as well?
Yeah, and we kind of wrote this book from the audience perspective as well. Like when I say audience, it's like us, and people with family, people with little children as well. Like how we don't have children, but we've got a dog. We can talk about him later. But like we thought about places that are kind of like easy to access, and it's kind of like a cheap adventure book in a way, because everything can be done in a day. There's no need to pack up your car with tents and hiking. Like to be honest, I still find myself very a not very confident camper, for example. So I'm writing this book for people like me. Yeah. When we did some research in the bookshops, like there aren't that many books that specializes on that ease of access in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, there are some very good guidebooks for Victoria, but they're related to, I suppose, the well-known hiking areas. And it often requires you to get out of town and, as you say, either spend a night in a hotel or a motel, or spend a night in a tent to actually do the walks, or have a bit of a long drive. And while I'm sure there's some crossover there, with this sort of book, you are picking up stuff that's fairly close to the city as well as a bit further away.
Yeah, and we were actually really blown away about different the terrain varied within that 130 kilometer radius, which was the boundaries we set ourselves. Like, you can drive a couple of hours out of the city and suddenly you're in an alpine, snowy mountain. And for Sydney siders like us, it was really, really surprising and pleasant.
All right, now let's get on to the book itself. So the first up, we're going to talk about Day Trip Melbourne, 52 Nature Adventures. Now, the book title describes very well what this book is about. So 52 walking adventures, all, as you said, within 130 kilometres of the Melbourne city centre, and each has been able to be done in a single day or a weekend, depending on how far you feel like driving in a single day. How did you go about choosing the walks that you did for this book?
We go by the rewards first. So like we really treat it almost like a holiday. Like, Andrew, what do you want to see? I love waterfalls. I love rocks. So and especially in Victoria, like the terrain is volcanic, so there are a lot of them. And then of course we thought about like which places have the best view. So we always start with the reward first, because we're simple like that. And obviously we would have gone. We went to more places than 52, because sometimes you read about a reward and then you got there and it's like, oh, but this is very similar to A, or like this is maybe not as grand as what we expected. And obviously we also threw in some popular places like Yuyang Regional Park, which which is so famous and it's full of people, but that is a reason why it is. And so we started with what natural spots are the prettiest or the most rewarding, and then kind of go from there.
Now, one thing I didn't actually think about is what's the shortest walk in this book, and what's your longest walk that you've actually gone through and reviewed?
I think the shortest would be less than a kilometre, which would be one of the waterfalls, which is Erskine Falls. It's a spectacular waterfall, and it's more of we kind of consider that one more of a destination. So you drive out there, you get out, you have a look around, and then maybe we imagine you could go to a different place in the area and do another walk. And I think the longest walk we had was Cape Woolamai.
Or Myrtle Gully Circuit.
But it was about 10 or 12 kilometres would be the longest walk.
Okay, and that's if you're a brand new walker, it might be a bit long, but for keen walkers, that's quite doable within a day, so that works well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think on average they're all about like 6 kilometres, I'd say.
Yeah, I know when I review walks that that 5 to 6 kilometre mark is probably the sweet spot that most people will look at quite comfortably. So I think it's a good distance. Now, you did mention before snow walks, and that was one of the things that did surprise me. As I was flicking through the book, I came across some photos in the snow, and I must admit it's not something that people tend to typically think about when they're thinking about hiking. What made you decide to include those walks?
Well, I think the tilt of the planet made us choose those walks. We actually did it. We did both the books in winter last year, so a lot of the destinations were covered in snow. But for us, it was kind of a really exciting situation because we love snow, and the snowy walks in the book can be completed in summer as well, and I'm sure they're just as spectacular. In fact, we know they are.
And I suppose it's one of those sort of things. I mean, you're not. Unless you are getting up into the Alpine National Parks, it's not as if you're walking through 2 feet of snow with some of these things, but it's enough to make a difference. And again, it's a bit of variety that, as you said, you're not likely to pick up around Sydney, not without travelling a lot further.
And it was such an adventure for us because we needed to hire snowshoes, and we'd never done that before, and yeah, it was a pretty funny day. Just a lot of new experiences.
Okay.
And that's kind of the spirit of kind of like how we curate things as well. Like we want people to, get comfortable doing something that's not part of their everyday. And like how do you curate 52 of them?
Okay, now your previous books have been written for the average person, which is not always the case with guidebooks. From what I understand, this is still the format with the new book, is it?
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. We're still average.
Yeah, we haven't evolved into the Uber hiker mensch yet. We're still, although we are getting better, but yeah, we're trying to appeal to a mass audience, as Evie was saying before, people with varying abilities, people who just want to drive to a waterfall, jump out and have a look, people with prams, people with dogs. We try and include a few walks for every type of person in the book. And obviously there's the longer ones too.
Yeah,
the more adventurous, we say.
No, that's good. Like your last books, the thing that really stood out to me was the use of what can be best described as hero images. The quality of the photos is still amazing and makes for a great hook to want to do these walks. Was choosing the image a hard process for you, or you'd gotten your eye and you knew what you were looking for from doing the previous books?
Yeah, it is hard. Well, it depends on the walk, to be honest. Some walks, there are just so many shots to choose from, and then other walks, not so much. But often we don't include shots that don't really tell the story of the walk, but we might love them much more than the shots we've put in. But as we're doing the walk, I'm taking a lot of photos. So
I think it's more personal to you, isn't it, Andrew? Like, because I wasn't taking the photos, and I mean, doing book design is kind of my day to day. I can be quite ruthless, and so in kind of editing down the photos. But obviously, because Andrew's involved, I need to take much more care.
I suppose that's always the thing, isn't it? It's one thing, as you say, when it's your day job, and you can say, "No, sorry, this is not going to happen." But
exactly.
Yeah, I get quite attached to the photos.
Yeah.
And it's so, you start off with thousands and then suddenly you're down to a few and then you have to cut more out. It's a big job.
As you said, I suppose, if you're doing a walk that's based on a waterfall, you've really got to have that shot of the waterfall because that's what it's about. But sometimes when it's more about the view or it's more about just walking through the forest, trying to identify an image that is going to really show what the walk is about can be a bit harder with the less obvious sort of walks.
Yeah, there was one walk where I'm sure I was annoying Evie to no end, where I took about 20 minutes taking a photo of a kookaburra. And not in the book. It's in the archives, yeah.
I must admit, I don't know what it is with me and birds. I cannot take a photo of a bird. Every time I get kookaburras laughing, I'll get out of the tent and they disappear. I go back in the tent and they're back again. And it's just like, they just don't want to hang around to be photographed by me, at least anyway.
They're taunting you.
I think so.
Okay.
Now, I know it's likely to be hard to pick, but what are your 3 favourite walks out of the 52 listed in this book?
The first one, probably, okay, this is a cheap answer, but maybe the Organ Pipes National Park.
Yep.
Or the, oh my God, I forgot the name of that movie, Andrew. Hanging Rock. Or Hanging Rock in the north. Yeah, because there is something about the rock formations in Victoria that I feel like are so unique. And I don't know, there is something about being, about feeling small within that formations. And I guess with Hanging Rock, it is so scenic, and you go up the top and you can see the view from surrounding. It's kind of crazy. And with Organ Pipes National Park, if you're a rock nerd, you will see different, again, rock formations caused by volcanic. And I found that really, I don't know, fascinating. I could just spend a whole day there. The second one that I love is Jepp's Pool and Cumberland Falls near Great Otway National Park. That's because that walk can only be done if the current is low enough. And we tried to do that walk 3 times, and third time lucky. We got there almost kind of later in the day. We walked and we walked. We crossed rivers a couple times, and it's just so beautiful and so quiet because I don't think many people walk that route. You can swim, and at the end there's a waterfall as well. It's really adventurous, and for me, I felt like I felt like I was leveling up doing that walk, and it's just being encapsulated again in very kind of virgin terrain. And the last one is maybe Werribee Gorge. I know that one is very popular, but again, it's a long walk ish. It's 7.5K loop, but you see so many different terrains within one walk. And, you jump across rocks, you scale some rocks, and, the land really change, between hours. And I don't know, it's one of those walks when you feel really magical. You come out of it and you were like, oh, I just did that. And I felt really good.
Yeah, I think as you said, with Werribee Gorge, it's a name. I don't know Victoria that well. It's a place I've still got to get down and do some walking, if any decent sort of amount down there. But I have heard Werribee Gorge, and I think walks are popular for a reason. It's either because they're close and you don't have to walk very far, or they're so good that everyone wants to do them. And from what I understand of Werribee, it might be popular, but it's popular for a reason. Now that's Day Trip Melbourne 52 Nature Adventures. The other book that you've released after that first book is Dog Trip Melbourne, and this is walks that you can take your four-legged friend on. Now, I'm not overly familiar with Victoria, but is Victoria the same as many other states where you can't take dogs into national parks? Or are there some parks where you can take them in?
Yeah, that's correct. You cannot take pets into national parks, but you can take them into, what are they called? Evie, they're not called state forests down there, are they? They're called
regional parks.
Regional parks. Yeah.
Okay.
Seems that Victorians are much more stringent or obedient when it comes to having dogs on their leash as well. So we found that having dog on the leash was quite important as well.
I suppose that's the thing as well. I mean, I must admit, I don't have an issue with dogs, but when you get a big dog that looks a bit scary, even though it might be the calmest thing in the world, it's you don't know that until if it's not your dog. So having it on the leash for people that are a bit worried about dogs is not a bad thing. And I've seen people with dogs in places they shouldn't be, and you think, well, this dog's going to get taken out by a kangaroo if it keeps on going. So I think it's a good thing for both the animal and for the people as well. So.
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of the main reasons why we chose to write the dog book, is so people can know where they can take their dog, where it's going to be safe and it's legal and all that, and high quality as well.
Now, making sure the dog's having a good time.
Yeah. Now, what was your dog's name again? I can't remember from the last time I talked to you.
His name is Henry.
Henry, okay. Now, how old's Henry again?
He's turning 6.
Okay, so he's not a puppy, but he's not really old, so he still likes getting out and about and doing the walks.
He's having a midlife crisis. Yeah.
Now, again, you've chosen a batch of walks in relation to dogs. What's different apart from the legality of where you can take your dogs? What do you look for when you're choosing walks for dogs?
First of all, when we say with the people books, like it has to be for a whole range of abilities with people. We also have to think about dogs as well, because especially our dog, if the walk starts going above like 7 or 8 Ks, he doesn't seem to enjoy himself as much. So in general, we tried to keep them a bit shorter than the book for people.
Yeah, I think unless you've got a really active, one of the active sort of sports breeds that just keep on going and going, most dogs probably would prefer the shorter walks, I can imagine.
Yeah, and dogs come in a lot of different shapes and sizes.
Yeah,
more so than people.
At least with Henry, he's small enough. If he gives up, you can pick him up and carry him. So I've always been a Great Dane owner, and I don't particularly want to carry them if I can help it.
No, it should be the other way around.
So again, you're looking at walks that suit the slightly shorter walks to suit the dogs and suit most dogs. As you said, you've got to take them to areas where you wouldn't be able to do a lot of the walks you chose for your day trip Melbourne book, because if they're in national parks, that rules them out. So did you find you were travelling to different areas, or you just had to do a bit more research to work out where the
regional parks?
Regional parks. So are they in similar areas, or you just had to go in a slightly different direction to find those?
Well, I think you just raised a point which I didn't raise before when you asked me, is also we try to make the dog walks a bit more urban. So that's kind of out of necessity, because obviously the national parks are a lot bigger, they're further out. We often think that if people want to go on a dog walk, they might want to do it after work or like on the weekend. Like, it doesn't have to be such a big day of it. So we try and make it a bit more local.
Having said that, we have found some gems, like walk number 14 on Dog Trip Melbourne is called Mount Disappointment, but it's actually not a disappointment. It's actually a really nice walk, like up this kind of mountain, I guess, and like there's a really and I guess like for the humans, there are historical snippets that we kind of wrote about. Like it was called Mount Disappointment because there were a few explorers that got to the point and couldn't see anything. And then we also found an arboretum called RJ Hammer in Olinda and Lala Falls.
The cover shot, actually.
Yeah, true. It is the cover shot. So, like, having said that, like, we found some really nice gems that are just as virgin as the human version, I guess. Yeah.
Now, again, similar sort of questions we talked about with Day Trip. What were the two favourite hikes in this book from your perspective and from your dog Henry's perspective, do you think?
I think from my perspective, it would be Sanatorium Lake in Mount Macedon. The day we did it, it was beautifully damp and misty, and when we got to the lake, the fog was rolling over and everything was reflecting on the still lake, and it was very scenic and fantastic for the photography side in me. And then I think Henry's favorite walk, I mean, I'm pretty sure is called RJ Hammer Arboretum. And where's that, Epi?
That's on the east, in the east.
Yeah, that's in the east, but that's quite like a kind of a very curated area with lots of different trees and plants, but it's not really manicured. It's very wild, and there's lots of different types of vegetation, and there's amazing rolling views over the valleys, and it's a good time.
Okay, that's good. That's good. All right, so now one final question. You've done Day Trip and Dog Trip Sydney. You've now done Day Trip and Dog Trip Melbourne. Are you taking a break, or are you moving on to another city at some point?
Well, I guess we've feels like we've taken a break, but we haven't at all. But no, we are not taking a break. We're heading down to Tasmania early next year, and we'll be staying there for about 6 weeks doing Day Trip Tasmania, which I think, the most excited about out of all the books that we've done. It's kind of like the holy grail for me of this series.
I think it's interesting actually you say that. So, you said Melbourne took you about 3 months. Tasmania is going to take you about 6 weeks. Are you getting the system down pat where you've got everything geared and you're in there and it's walk, walk, walk?
Yeah. we pretty much needed 3 months because we were still working when we were doing the Melbourne series, and we kind of figured out if we do it full time, we could do a book in 5 weeks. I mean, that's very ambitious, but and that's what we're doing in Tasmania. We're only doing Day Trip Tasmania for now. That is the publishers think there are not enough dogs in Tasmania to warrant a title yet. But I personally am really excited, like 5 weeks in nature every day and just, getting the steps up. That's going to be good, right? Like, surely.
Yeah, the Melbourne books, we did, I think, 100 bush walks in 100 days. And by the time we finished, we were so fit. We personally, I quickly became unfit. But I'm looking forward to being fit again, yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're doing sort of 1 to 2 to 3 walks a day, depending on the length of the walks, it's sort of, you do get fit very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we've been talking with authors Evie O and Andrew Grune about the Day Trip Melbourne 52 Nature Adventure book and Dog Trip Melbourne. Andrew, Evie, thank you for taking your time to chat with us.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for having us again.
It was great to catch up with Andrew and Evie about the release of their 2 new guidebooks, Day Trip Melbourne, 52 Nature Adventures, and Dog Trip Melbourne, 52 Dog-Friendly Nature Adventures. 104 walks is pretty good, and I think it's a long overdue as well. So this was from my perspective, these guidebooks tend to be very unique. There seems to be a pattern in how the standard hiking and bushwalking guidebooks look and feel, and these books are written by people who don't claim to be expert hikers, which is not a bad thing because this is the average person going on a bushwalk or the average person taking their dog for a walk, rather than someone who's really experienced and tends not to think about all the little details and the fine details that new walkers may not necessarily consider.
And the other thing is the walks are quite short, so they're not technical walks, and it is also about the experience and what you see and the reward that you get. So that's kind of a nice thing to focus on that and get back to basics.
Yeah, and listening to Andrew talk about the photography, he's obviously the photographer, and Evie is actually the one that works in the book industry and can be quite ruthless in cutting the photos down. So I must admit, it's from my perspective, if I go on to a week-long hike, I expect to take about 800 photos, and it sounds like Andrew is about the same. So it's always good to have someone who can look at the images for what they are, as what are the key images that really provide a feel and a look for that particular walk, rather than just here's a series of images that could be just about anywhere. One of the things that was obvious to me from the last 2 Sydney books is there's more inclusion of drone footage, and there's a couple where the hero image for the walk is actually a drone image. And they're often a bit artistic as well. So there's one in particular I'm thinking of where it's taking a photo from a drone of a large, long bridge, and it's a really good looking image. And I think that's the thing when you do these walks. If you just flick through without even reading it, you can think, okay, that's a really amazing looking photo. I wouldn't mind going along and seeing what that's like myself. And I think that's the thing with guidebooks. There's 2 ways you can go with guidebooks. You can either go full on detail, or you can do enough detail to get there and do the walk and encourage people and enthuse people without scaring them off.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing I think I like about these books is that those images do entice you. They do draw you in, and it's nice to be able to recognize something when you're on a walk and you go, oh, I saw that in the guidebook, and how special am I, along with everybody else who's doing this walk.
Going specifically onto the Dog Trip Melbourne, and again, I hadn't really thought about this. Their dog Henry, I think by the look of it, is a whippet, very small, skinny-looking little dog, but it looks like it's got loads of character. It really does. And from talking to Andrew and Evie last time, they said Henry likes having his photo taken, and he just seems to...
Don't we all know?
He just seems to stop in just the right spot and stay there long enough for Andrew to get some really good images. And there are some good images, not just of him but also of other dogs as well.
Yeah, to be not much of a dog guidebook or a trail book for dogs if your dog never stopped at the right spots or didn't stop at all.
The cover image for the Dog Trip Melbourne book has got a photo of Henry on the front cover. And it's interesting, you look through the rest of the photos, and these walks were all done in wintertime. And in most of the other images, Henry's got a coat on.
A little coat?
A little coat, yeah. Except for this one. So I'm guessing he's probably sitting there or standing there thinking, give me my coat back, I'm freezing.
Hurry up, it's getting cold here. And they did say that they did do this book, or the walks and the images for this latest series of books during winter.
Yeah, including some with snow, which is, again, this is not what you would typically get in a hiking guidebook, is photos of people walking in the snow. It's just something you just don't tend to see. I think the thing with the dog book in particular as well, I mean, certainly that's not a space that I'm in at the moment. I don't have a dog and haven't had for a number of years now. But I think, you can be forgiven for thinking, well, if I'm going to get both books, I might just do some of the other walks, even though they're designed as dog-friendly walks. Just because they are dog-friendly doesn't mean you can't walk them. And I think, from what Andrew was saying, that Henry likes walks around about that 6-7-ish sort of kilometre length.
Which sounds like a lot of people, really, not just dogs.
Yeah, and that is true. We find that the walks we review, that 5-6 kilometre seems to be the sweet spot that people really get enthusiastic about and go through and review. Or go through and do a walk on, because it's something that's comfortable and most people can manage. If you're a keen hiker, long distances tend not to be a problem, but sometimes you don't have the time. You just want to be able to say, okay, a 6 or 7 kilometre walk, if I allow 3 to 4 hours, I can do that comfortably, have a lunch break, and get back to whatever else it is that you want to go through and do. And from a dog's perspective, again, not all dogs will cope with long walks. Some dogs, some of the working breeds, the Kelpies and things like that, will just keep on going and going all day. Other dogs, they'll just sit down and say, no, that's it, I've had enough.
Well, you were talking about our Great Danes, and they definitely would just sit down and say, this is it.
Yeah, Great Danes aren't endurance animals, so you do not take them on long walks, otherwise you will end up carrying a 45 to 50 kilo dog back home again. So at least with the smaller dogs, you can actually get away with that. One of the things I like about this series in general is I don't mean this in an insulting way. They're formulaic. They look the same. They feel the same. The Sydney books were a green colouring. The Melbourne books are an orange colouring, but they're the same size. They're the same sort of length. The formatting is the same. So if you're used to the Sydney book already and pick up the Melbourne book, you're going to know exactly what it is and how it works.
I think they're recognisable and they're familiar, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think it's the sort of thing that they talked about at the end of the podcast, that they're looking at doing Tasmania early in the new year.
but not Dog Trip Tasmania, because apparently there aren't that many dogs. I don't know what where their publishers are coming from there, but anyway.
Well, I think obviously they must think that there's a limitation to people who buy dog guidebooks. But it'd be interesting to see. Who knows if the sales of the hiking or walking book go just as well as Sydney or Melbourne do. Who knows? They might come back and do a dog friendly version of that.
Yeah, maybe we could start a petition or something.
So, it's good to see that they're continuing on with this series. And I think, I'd say obviously they'll probably move on from there over the next few years as the popularity continues with these books. Okay, we hope you've enjoyed this interview with Andrew and Evie. If you want to see more information on each of these 2 guidebooks, Day Trip Melbourne and Dog Trip Melbourne, go to the show notes for this podcast episode on the Australian Hiker website, and there'll be links to the full reviews to show you some of the images and what's included in the books. They really are well worth it, and I think if you're anywhere from the average person to the super keen hiker, you'll get value out of them, and particularly if you're a dog walker on your hikes, this is a good opportunity to find some walks you may not know have existed. Okay, that's all for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.
And bye from me.